quotidien?
En fait, c'est une phobie maladive. C'est une phobie maladive. Je supporte pas l'humour. Je supporte pas l'humour.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. We will be starting in about 5 minutes with our first speaker. We're expecting more people to come in now, so it would be so cool if you could move to the center of the row so that people don't have to climb over you when arriving. It's going to start in about 5 minutes. And I just wanted to remind you that we have a code of conduct here for this WordCamp. And the code of conduct is actually what makes WordCamps being that great for everybody. So I suppose that everybody has read the code of conduct, is familiar to it, and I kindly remind you to respect the code of conduct. It's very important for everybody in here, to the organizers, for all of us. So if you feel that there are actions here that are going against the code of conduct, you can find our friendly volunteers, organizers, people wearing the purple T-shirts, and report anything if you have experienced it or if you have seen that anybody else has been experiencing a violation of the code of conduct. And there is also on the website of the WWU. Yes, I have some trouble with this WCEU website. You have a form where you can report also anonymously a violation of the code of conduct. And I wanted to remind you that we will have official lunchtime at 1 a.m. till 2 a.m. This is the official break between the sessions, but lunch is going to be served from 12:30 till 14:30 till 2:30. And if you are not planning on going into late morning sessions or into early afternoon sessions, please use the extra time because that will making the queues not that long, so it will be fine for everybody having lunch. Okay, see you in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Hello everybody again and welcome back to WordCamp Europe. Bonjour à tout le monde et bienvenue à la deuxième journée de WordCamp Europe. My name is Carol and I will be your MC for the next 4 sessions in track 1, Pullmann, until the lunch break. Half of WordCamp Europe 2017 lies already behind us. Isn't it a bit sad? Time always seems to fly when we are having a good time. But I promise, there's still a lot of inspiring stuff waiting for you today. And believe me, this is track to be this morning. I hope you have found some couple of hours of sleep, because we will start now with the morning sessions. And I bet you don't want to miss a single word just because of being sleepy. I wanted to remind you that this evening, there will be an awesome after party. And it will starting at 8 p.m. And I would love to see you all there. We are going to have an amazing time. And not having a 1913 Parisian dress is not an excuse not to show up, because jeans and t-shirt will be fine too. I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker this morning, who flew to Paris from Washington, D.C., where he works for the US Digital Service at the White House. He improves the usefulness and reliability of the most important digital services of the United States. He got involved with WordPress in 2009, when he was working at his student newspaper at university, where he was studying biological anthropology. Yes, human skeletal remains. Only later did he find out that he was a developer, and a damn good one. He's the WordPress lead developer, led 3 major releases, mentored contributors, and spearheaded new development. He has strong feelings about the core philosophies of WordPress. It's an incredible honor for me to welcome on stage Nacin.
Hello, good morning. How many people are still at bars, I wonder? I'm going to bring something from Silicon Valley. Has anyone heard of this product? The Juicero? I don't know how to pronounce it. I tried. This was a pretty good indication of Silicon Valley's excess. It's a juicer, and it is perfect. It is, in fact, 4.5 billion years of perfect. They had some problems here. First off, it cost a lot of money. You had this idea that you could actually just take the bag of juice that they would ship to you, and you could just squeeze all of the juice out, which kind of defeats the purpose. This didn't really go too well. They ended up refunding customers money. But Ben Einstein, who's a VC in Silicon Valley, wrote this piece about the hardware. And the reason why it ended up being so expensive is because they went all out to build this masterpiece. Every single piece, we have injected molded parts, very specific pieces of plastic. This is unconstrained development. Very specific pieces. It had Wi-Fi. It had a QR code reader to check to make sure that your juice might not be expired, because that would just be very bad. And every single bit of it, it's machined parts. I can keep going. I have so many more things here. And ultimately, I think the problem here, there were a lot of problems. No one actually bothered, I think, to say, wait, what are we doing? What problem are we trying to solve? By the way, the door was more than 25 parts, just the door, which you didn't need to open because it's a juicer. The problem is that they created an engineering problem where there wasn't any kind of engineering problem. They had this problem, perhaps, like people want juice, and instead they ended up building this monstrosity that cost a lot of money and wasn't all that useful. And I hope, that at some point an engineer said, do we actually need to build exactly this thing that perfectly compresses the juice at once, when in reality you could just take the bag and just squeeze it out with your hands, which isn't that useful. how often in development do we sometimes have to ask a question like this? How often do sometimes we have to say, you know what? Now, I think, personally, that with this amazing thing here, that they just had fun with it, and they're like, whatever, we have money, we will build this awesome, perfect machine that is just as good as my hands at squeezing juice out of a bag. But in this case, how often is it that we can perhaps just better understand one specific requirement, just one requirement, and realize, you know what, it suddenly simplifies everything else that we're building about 10 times over. This is the whole thing. I'm just going to leave that up there for a bit. My name is Andy Nacin. I'm one of the lead developers of WordPress. For the last 2 years, 5 months, and about 5.5 days, I've been on a leave of absence where I've worked at the US Digital Service in DC. Not that I'm counting the days or anything like that. At least I'm counting up rather than down. And I want to talk a little bit today about how I think that you can make a bigger impact with people skills rather than simply with code. And when we think about people skills, we think about, softly influencing people, showing empathy for our users, having a self-awareness, knowing good problem-solving techniques, things like that. And being a good communicator, for example, very important. But I want to get to some of the other areas here as well. So I think what's really important is we need to be thinking for users, with users, not for them. We want to be able to just do the discovery and learn what we want to do, but at the same time, we need to be able to see the problem for ourselves, because too often we end up not really paying attention to what the actual problem is. So I want to tell a story about my time in government. We had, this is a few stories here. We had this system. There were 3 different government agencies, and there were 3 different systems, one at every agency. If you've ever heard of Conway's Law, it's a very classic problem here where systems take the shape of the communication structures. So you have 3 agencies. Of course, we're going to have 3 systems. And these 3 systems, they were about 14 years old, so about as old as WordPress, not exactly maintained. One of them, and I'll just to give you some more color, the first one was written in Visual Basic. I don't mean like .NET, I mean like old school Visual Basic. The second one was written in Java, so we'll let that one slide. And the third one was written in PL SQL, which is Oracle's procedural language, written in SQL. It's about as bad as it sounds. And we had this problem where we had these 3 different systems that all had to communicate with each other. And we were trying to figure out how it worked, because we had a major problem. We had a major incident that we had to deal with. We had to move data from A to B to C. And we had no idea what happened with system B. We weren't actually sure if it was a system. If it was an entire room full of people just writing out spreadsheets, I wouldn't entirely have been surprised. And so we ended up looking through all of this, and we realized, oh, OK, we have finally figured out that when an email gets sent to this group, they do something with it, and then something happens, and it magically gets up into system C. So we eventually tracked down where these people worked. They were in a basement in Washington, D.C., of course. And we said, can you show us what you do? We have no idea. And they said, oh, yeah, sure. So we get these 50 emails every single day, and we download the attachment for every single one of them. And then we save them onto this server over here. And then they walk over to the server, sit down, and then they run this file. And this file was, we thought it was going to be the code. It wasn't. We had to find the binary and deal with that separately. We still didn't entirely know what it did, but it did generate. It took all of this XML, yes, and then generated a fixed width text file, which is even better, which would then be individually uploaded into a system. But first, we had to get it to that system. So they would then download all these files one by one to a floppy disk, which he then said, oh, 1 second, and ran across the room, pulled it out of one computer, ran back, put it in another. I'm pretty sure there was only one floppy disk in this whole operation. They saved everything down onto this floppy disk. And then he walked back over to a third computer. He's still in the same room, by the way. There's a lot of computers, and I think he uses all of them. plugs it in, uploads every one of these files individually. And we looked at each other in silence. And we're like, what is this? What did we just find? And we realized that what we found was a system that was working exactly as designed. Because 13 years ago, there was a team over here writing Visual Basic exactly to requirements, and there was a team over here writing PL SQL exactly to requirements, and there was a team over here writing Java exactly to requirements. And they all built the system exactly how it was supposed to work, which also involved a human running around with a floppy disk in order to move data between them. So we were able to cut out System B entirely once we finally understood how it worked. But until we specifically physically tracked people down to learn how all of this was tied together, we really had no chance to find this. I don't think this is that controversial of a statement. I'm sure there are a number of designers here. Your job as a designer is not to make things look pretty. That's fair? Yes? So why do we think that our job as a developer is to write code? Doesn't really make sense. Our job is not, as a developer, to write code. Our job is, it doesn't really matter. You can write the best code possible. Has anyone figured out how to open these water bottles, by the way? They're kind of, there we go. You can write the absolute best code possible. This was the best Visual Basic code you will ever see, I think, at least. But it didn't actually solve the problem. And the problem here is that developers, our job is not to write code. Our job is to solve the problem. I have another story. There was this system that was used by about 500,000 people every month to go in, citizens of the United States, to go in and complete a specific task. I will protect the teams and not actually say what it was. It was this old, crummy thing. Now, you can imagine in government sometimes it's like the PDF that you have to submit, and it only works in Internet Explorer 9. Like, it doesn't work in 10 or 8, or for that matter, Chrome or Firefox. Didn't exist yet at the time. Firefox, even, I'm pretty sure. And so we're like, OK, well, we have to rewrite this. It's not good. So we rewrote, this entire thing got rewritten and pushed onto a new system. And no one used it. 500,000 people? 500 people. We're like, OK, we'll wait. That'll even out eventually. A few months later, 500,000 people? 550 people. Not exactly the ratio that we wanted. And I asked about this. I was like, well, why did we build this? And they said, oh, well, it was on our roadmap. OK. Why aren't people using it? Oh, because they can't log into the new system. Why can't they? Oh, that isn't on our roadmap. What happened here is we didn't actually solve the problem. We wrote code because we wanted to write code. But we missed the fact where we need to be able to solve the underlying problem here. Another thing that I end up doing a lot day to day is explaining technology to non-technology people. It is not that unusual. I have a very odd job. And it is not that unusual for me to, in the morning, be in a meeting with developers, and by lunchtime, be in a meeting with the agency director explaining why this bug is going to require him to probably notify Congress of a problem. That is not good. That is what we normally call a bad bug. And this happens a lot when we're dealing with teams, right? We have to go to the pitch meeting. Now, some of you might work at very large firms, and there's only a few people that always go to the pitch meetings. Like, there's always those few engineers that always get called to go to the pitch meeting. That's because they're really good at this. They're really good at explaining technology to non-technology people. At the same time, how good are you at explaining non-technology to technology people? This great story, there was a system, I think it was in the Department of Defense, in the military. And a legendary story at USDS. I guess I can tell it. And there was this funny thing where there was all of these laws and regulations specifically spelling out how it needed to work. But at the end of the day, when we looked through all of the code in the system, we found a single line that looked a little weird. And then we read the comment above it. And the comment said, well, the policy says this, but that doesn't actually make any sense, so we're just going to do that. So a developer randomly made a decision about, like, I don't know, how the law is supposed to work or something like that, and just left it as a code comment, which is like one of the best things you could possibly imagine. The problem, though, is that how often, for example, do we need to be able to talk to someone and say, talk to your project manager or your client or whatever that might be and say, I need to spend this amount of time to build an internal API that you might not benefit from directly, but I promise you it's really important, and then here's why. And along those same lines, how well can you negotiate requirements, right? You don't want to spend X amount more time than you need to complete the task. You want to do exactly what's necessary. Another thing that we have had some fun with in government is trying to convince them to use the cloud. So imagine this scenario. You're in a meeting with a cabinet minister, I'm using the European terms here. I'm trying. You're in a meeting with a cabinet minister, and they say, tell me why I should go to the cloud. What is your answer going to be? Is it going to be like, well, let me tell you all the cool stuff you could do with EC2? No, probably not. Is it going to be because it's going to be cheaper and faster, and also you won't have any major problems? Hopefully. What if they then say, well, will it still be secure? You're going to say yes. They're like, OK, but I can't surround the building with my guards, with people with guns. How will I be able to keep it secure? This is an actual question that we've received. You have someone else saying, well, that's great, but if there's a hack, or if I have to do an investigation, how do I put the cloud into an evidence bag? If I need to go to my data center and pull a server out and put it in an evidence bag, I can do that. Imagine trying to explain technology and things like the cloud, or the cyber, or whatever else you want to put in air quotes, to someone who normally testifies in front of the House of Commons or something like that. How do you actually make that work? It's really important to be able to communicate without using jargon. At the beginning of this talk, I was asked by the translators to see my slides. I said, I promise you, there's no jargon in this whole talk. It's pretty simple, because I want to be able to communicate to everyone. I also think that your interactions with others end up mattering a lot more than the code that you write. When I'm looking at a new system for the first time, I normally don't care as much how good the system is. I'm also trying to understand how good the team is behind it. And we do this in WordPress as well. In WordPress, when we're considering which external libraries to add, anyone get the joke? No? A little bit? When we're considering what libraries to add to WordPress, we end up considering not the technology, but also all of the other pieces. How well does that team communicate with us? About 5 years ago, a few of us met with the creator of Backbone.js, specifically to talk about, we want to build a new media library, the media library that's been in WordPress for about 5 years now. And we want to pick what at the time was the Ascendant JavaScript framework for about a week, I guess. And we were trying to figure out, should we go with this? And so we sat down with him and specifically talked out our concerns and your philosophies and how does all of that make sense? And can we, does this make sense to adopt? We have very good relationships with the jQuery team. jQuery is now more than half as old as JavaScript. It goes back a number of years. And it's not the sexiest or best piece of software out there, but it is something that ends up being really great for just doing things on the internet. And so it's really important that our philosophies lined up with that project. Current conversations right now about using React or using Vue.js. And a lot of that isn't just which one is better software, but also how many people maintain it. Do we have conversations with them? How are our interactions with those teams? It matters a lot more than really anything else. What I would also argue is that not only do your interactions with others matter more than the code you write, but also the code you write can improve your interactions with others. And so let me give you an example. You are doing code review, and you are constantly commenting about coding style. You need an extra space here. This should really be broken up into 2 lines. I'm not entirely sure why you didn't put this if statement here instead. Little things like that. And over time, you are expending social capital and potentially creating negative interactions with someone when you don't necessarily need to. In Go, in the language Go, they have an entire specific defined, this is how Go is formatted. They have eliminated all arguments about formatting Go. Probably not true. There's some mailing list somewhere. But they've just papered over all of that. So if you could imagine in your continuous integration, you're running your unit tests, or you are making sure that it is styled correctly, you can now let a computer handle those interactions rather than you. An example that I had in government is that I was back to the floppy disk story a bit. I was trying to make sure that all of these agencies were basically doing their homework. And I was the big, bad, mean person who would send them emails each day, letting them know how far along they were and the things that we needed them to do. But at the same time, I was also offering to help, and in some cases, sitting down with their engineers or talking about their problems. And I realized they didn't like me all that much, because I would also be the person that would hold them accountable by sending them emails and saying, hi, you didn't do all the things that we needed you to do. And so I sat down with them and I said, OK, let's make a deal. I will stop bothering you if you can agree on what metrics we need to track. And we'll take those metrics, we'll put them in a dashboard, and then you can be mad at the dashboard and not at me. This ended up working out really well. They stopped being mad at me. They started responding to me nicely now, instead of me being the big, evil, mean person. And then they had a single source of truth for them to work off of. This ends up being really helpful. Rather than arguing about, like, well, what is causing the problem? Well, now we have a non-human telling us specifically what those problems are. And I guess I'll end with this idea of, as many times as possible, asking more questions. I was dealing with an authentication system at a specific agency. And an engineer said, well, we really want to have System A and System B talk to each other securely. Nacin, how should we do that? And I said, oh, well, just, I don't know, like 2A TLS or something else like that. Just have them talk. And like, oh, OK, that works. And I was like, wait, it's not that easy. What else are you trying to do? I said, oh, well, a user logs in here, and then the data gets stored over here. And so we're just going to like share a secret key back and forth. I said, oh, you're describing, depending on the specifics, like OAuth or SAML. I was like, you should use one of those. And they're like, yeah, maybe. We might not. And I was like, wait, you're inventing your own authentication system. This is not a good idea. What are you actually trying to do? And after asking enough questions, I realized that what they were trying to do is they didn't trust the developers on the team to actually write something to OAuth or SAML spec. At which point my question was, what makes you think they're going to write anything else that's secure either? In the end, a lot of times this comes down to what kind of people skills can we really deploy. We have this hanging up at our office. Asking more questions is actually a Post-it note at the end with a question mark at the end of it. We find that it ends up being really important to ask why, to listen, and to be able to respond very deliberately. And I'll close with one final story. Floppy disks, fax machines, some kind of pattern here about old legacy government technology. In this particular case, we were asked that every day someone faxed a ton of a spreadsheet to about 40 people. And then those people would all retype all of the information. This is not very good. And we said, well, you could email it. And they said, well, it's protected information, and we can't email it unencrypted. I said, oh, well, you could do what every other government agency does, which is encrypt the email and send it, and then send a follow-up email with the password. And they said, no, our information security people are actually pretty smart. They require us to use a fax machine because it's secure. Not going to touch that one. And so at that point, we're like, OK, that's fine. What are you actually trying to do? And they said, well, we're trying to eliminate the fax machine. I'm like, are you? You're trying to eliminate the idea of typing up all the information again, right? You're not trying to eliminate the fax. They're like, well, are you recommending that we do like optical character recognition? I said, no. Your purpose isn't to stop faxing. Your purpose is to stop typing. What if you send the encrypted email and then fax them the password? So this is exactly how the system still works 2 years later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nacin, for sharing your valuable experiences with us. That was really, really interesting. Do you want to have a Q&A?
Sure. Does anyone have any
Yeah,
questions?
good. I think we will find the time for that.
Unfortunately,
So,
you will all need to walk up to the mics, because everyone's
yeah.
up here.
There are 2 standing microphones here in the front rows and also in the upper rows. So we would love you to ask some questions to our speaker. Oh, there's somebody coming. It's behind you. Great.
Hey, Nacin, thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting to see how you dealt with the bureaucracy, particularly layers upon layers that have existed for a long time before even the invention of the computer. How is it that you've managed to turn around middle management, budget accountants and stuff who have got, they're not even, beyond not understanding, they don't even use the majority of the applications that we end up developing for them. So how have you managed to get around talking to those guys?
I think what's really interesting is a lot of these people have invented their own systems, especially if they're on the front lines. I worked in immigration policy and a lot of the processes there in the United States for about 2 years. And it was amazing to see how many Excel spreadsheets and Access databases and everything else were used to tie all of this together outside of all the other systems that existed. And what we realized is as long as we can end up making something for them that's going to ultimately be better, we know how long something should take in isolation. But in reality, they're very good at it. They spend all day flipping through paper, for example, to the point where they use like the little like rubber thimbles to flip through paper really quickly. And they're like better at that than we are. So them scrolling through a PDF takes an hour, but them flipping through the same amount of paper takes 10 minutes to read everything. And so trying to optimize those kinds of things ends up being really hard. In many ways, what we end up doing, at least to solve these problems, in addition to trying to do as much research as possible so we can really come up with a good solution that actually does work and doesn't make their lives worse but makes it easier, is really just trying to befriend them and work with them. USDS is really interesting because we don't have a huge culture to speak of by ourselves, because we often end up grafting ourselves onto other agencies' cultures. So I did 5 years of remote work, and then went into government where I literally would go find that middle manager and sit at their desk and talk with them, and then go somewhere else and talk with them, currying favor. I think a lot of my time dealing with contributors online and comment threads on WP Tavern and everything else made me pretty good at talking to people and trying to understand their problems and then trying to work through that. But it's definitely a huge challenge for us every single day.
Hello, Michael from France. You present your experience with a state agency. What is your feedback with WordPress?
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand the question.
You present your feedback from state agency, but yet, what is your return from WordPress development as lead?
Well, there are a lot of people who work to lead WordPress right now, which is really great. A lot of them are here, some of them are not. I honestly couldn't fully understand your question, unfortunately. I don't know if anyone else has.
If you want, maybe you can ask in French, and I can en français, et je vais essayer de traduire.
Excusez-moi, vous avez relaté votre expérience avec les agences d'État. Quel est votre retour, votre expérience au sein de WordPress?
Yeah. Ooh.
Anyone else want to help? No?
Is there anybody else?
Did I
who can
read the
help?
translation? Did that help?
Oh, okay. You can help maybe. So I will give you my microphone.
Yes, I think the question is, inside of the WordPress space, do you have similar experiences, or are there differences in your experience? How they relate to government work?
I think what's most interesting about WordPress is that it is not a perfect piece of software, and that is okay, and that is a good thing. I would rather have an imperfect piece of software that actually helps people than a perfect piece of software that no one uses.
Is it okay for you? Andrea?
Hi. I agree with all of that. And I'm also curious, have you ever seen a Juicero moment in the WordPress project, or a Juicero moment that we narrowly avoided?
I have a lot of stories of us narrowly avoiding that moment. In WordPress 3.1, we were developing what is now called internal linking in WordPress, where when you inserted a link, it let you link to your existing content. And the original designs for this were like the worst that you would ever see in open source. If you ever used like Adium, especially back in the day, the old chat app, you know how like the preferences pane had like preferences? And then like it had like an advanced tab inside of that? That's kind of what we ended up developing. It was this weird, it had all sorts of different stuff in it. And the way that we saved ourselves from that is that we did a lot of iteration and we did a lot of usability testing. And I remember working with Jen Milo a lot on that in particular, and Daryl Coopersmith, to try and really like simplify as much of the UI as possible and smooth a lot of that out. I think that WordPress core has mostly avoided a lot of those really painful moments. We've gone through them, but we've usually not shipped it. I think the WordPress community struggles a bit more with this, where you look at, for example, most of the security and caching plugins just like have so many things baked onto them that don't really make a lot of sense. And that ends up being kind of painful in many ways. I definitely like vividly remember, I have screenshots of this original interface that I really should show off in a blog post or something when I start writing blog posts again. I want you to know I have like 100 drafts ready to go. The day I leave government, they're just going to start going out. It's going to be great. I have way more stories than just these, that's for sure. Just I can't share these. So.
We have one last question over here, please.
Yes, hello, Luis from Spain. The big problem. How can you find out what the clients really need from what they say they think they need?
If I knew how to answer that succinctly, I would have written a book a long time ago. A lot of it comes down, I mean, this is hard because a lot of clients that we deal with are people that are trying to just get the word out, and it's more about marketing, and it's less about they themselves have users. So that ends up being really difficult. But as much as possible, especially when we're building rich applications, trying to understand what their users really want is really helpful. What I like to do is, rather than trying to go around behind a client or a government agency or something like that, instead build that into the original relationship. it's really helpful when someone comes to you and says, we want to do this thing, but we don't really know what our users want either. And then you can hopefully begin that relationship with, great, we're going to do some user research, and we're going to try to come back with a proposal for what you might want to do. And all too often, a lot of contracts are based on just purely development and not based on any kind of product sense or any kind of experience in terms of what the user really needs. And that's usually where things go sideways very quickly.
Thank you so much. I think that's it. And we were talking before Nacin came on stage, so he would like to go to the expert bar, and so maybe if there are some more questions, you can find him over there and chat with him in person. So thank you so much for having been here on stage, and please give a big applause again to Nacin. Thank you. The next session will start here soon. We have a short delay, but the other track is informed, so you can move comfortably to the other track if you want so. And here we were going to have at 10 a.m. Dwayne McDaniel, and his session is going to be "We are all making this up: improv lessons for developers," and I'm sure it's going to be a great session too. And there's also the community tribe meetup starting in the Houseman building. See you in 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you. would you be so kind to find a seat? That would be so cool, because we are trying to start now with our next session. I'm just gonna give you 1 minute more to make yourself comfortable. I was talking before the talk we had at 9 that there's going to be an after party this evening. I'm sure you all know already, and you're looking forward to it because you want to come. And I got the information that children under 10 years are unfortunately not allowed to come to the after party. So we all love your children you brought here, but under 10, not this evening. Thank you so much. Our next speaker comes from the United States again, and he's fond of science fiction, comics, and karaoke. Some of you had the pleasure to witness this yesterday evening. But his real passion is improv. He loves producing and performing improv theater, and he has been involved with that art form for twice as long as he has been involved in WordPress. And he saw so many similarities between the open source development world and the improv communities that he decided to submit a lightning talk for a Drupal event. And this talk was evolving since then. Today, he works for Pantheon, a website management platform, and he's a community and agency manager there. As a 10-year-old boy, he wanted to become a stand-up comedian. So please prepare for a funny, interactive, and instructive talk. And put your hands together for Dwayne McDaniel.
Hello. Hello, Europe. Wow, this is a long walk. Jenny was right yesterday. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for coming out today. So, as she's already said all of this, I won't repeat it, except if you want to get my slides and anything else about me, you can go to mcdwayne.com, mcdwayne.com, and there's my stuff. And again, she's already given a lovely plug for Pantheon, the website management platform. I have some colleagues here. Those are their pictures, Drew and Matt and Andrew. If you see them, bother them. They will appreciate it. Bother me later about this. Happy to talk to you about any kind of workflow, any kind of scale for your websites. That's who I am. I always like to know who I'm talking to, and I know there's a lot of you. So just on the count of 3, yell out your name. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. And where do you work? 1, 2, 3. And what city are you from? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. I think I got all of that. But also, who here is a professional developer? Who spends most of their time? Who builds websites but does not maintain them? Okay, this guy. He's honest. And who maintains websites but does not build them? Okay, go look at that guy, because he needs your help. Or you need his help. All right, so why am I talking about improv at a WordCamp? I think it boils down to this. Very simply, we must think on our feet. We cannot predict everything that can possibly happen. We can't script every scenario. We must react in the moment to what's going on. That's why I think it boils down to this one central point. But I'm always curious. Why did you come to a talk about improv at a WordCamp? Anybody, just in the front section so I can hear you, but anybody?
My friend, awesome speaker.
Thank you. I got some friends in the front row. Any other thoughts? What's that?
It'll be entertaining.
It will be entertaining, hopefully. Any other? Curiosity. That's the most common answer I get when I ask this question. Why I personally am giving this talk is really, as she's already said it, I saw so many similarities, and it really comes down to this similarity, and this is the only slide I'll read verbatim. Creativity is not the clever rearranging of the known. Creativity is a state that allows us to touch the unknown and bring it into the phenomenal world, to make the invisible visible. The unknown is a territory that holds all possibilities until it is revealed. The act of revealing, that is creativity. And if that doesn't describe what web developers do, I don't know what else does. We take ideas on the back of napkins that someone that does not know how a server works will explain to us, I want this and this and this, and we'll transform that into JavaScript, into PHP, into WordPress, and make their dreams come true. But specifically, I saw some very specific parallels between the two worlds. Having done improv for as long as I have, I started to realize that there are best practices of improv, things like yes and things we'll talk about for the rest of this talk, that are stretched over these frameworks, these formats that you get to do, the Herald, the La Ronde. I'll talk about more later. But the same way that we take don't repeat yourself or code is poetry and stretch it over PHP, stretch it over lamp stacks. The end product must be enjoyable, regardless of how it's made. But if you've ever seen a website that's so well designed, you're like, that is just simply beautiful. You'll appreciate it as a developer, but that end user who knows nothing about the technology will also find it beautiful. Same is true of the stagecraft. Every single effort is unique. Even if it's just content unique, it's very unique. You have to cooperate. Even if you're working by yourself, you have to cooperate with the rest of the open source world. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants, everyone here. And at the end of it, we all love to party. After 3 drinks, you cannot tell a WordPress developer from a Drupal developer from a Joomla developer. And after 4 drinks, you can't tell the difference between anyone, no matter what they do for a living. All right, so the rest of this talk will work as this. I'm going to go over 7 key improv principles and how they relate to the stagecraft and how I see them applied to the development process. And then we'll have some fun. I'll ask for a few participants. We'll do something fun up here. So this is the one piece that almost everyone knows about improv. It's the thing you hear repeatedly out there. Many blogs have been written about it. In fact, I've written a blog series to support this talk, and I just copy-pasted from other people's blogs about this topic of yes and. Agreeing to an idea and adding additional information on top of it to build a world. I'm using Tina Fey here because she wrote this wonderful book called Bossy Pants. And in it, she uses this example of the Christmas gun. So let's imagine for a second that there are 2 performers on stage. And the first performer comes up and holds his gun up, holds his hand like this and says, stick him up. And the second performer says, that's not a gun. He's destroyed the scene. There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. You need to start all over from there. And if he says, stick him up, and the second player says, okay. He's added no new information. He's acknowledged that, yes, there's a gun, but he's done nothing to further the cause, further the scene, to carry the idea forward. But if he says, stick him up, and says, oh, Harold, put down your Christmas gun. You're always waving it around. Well, what the heck's a Christmas gun? Now we can unpack that. What does that mean? We know that this person is Harold now. We know that he's always waving a gun around. There's so much information simply because he said, yes, I agree with your idea, and I'm going to add to it. So for development, am I saying say yes to every crazy idea a client has? No, absolutely not. I'm saying acknowledge every idea that comes out. And instead of saying no, add more information to lead the conversation in the direction you want to go. For instance, if you have a client call you and say, I would like a picture of my dog at the top of every single web page, every single page on my site, and they sell shoes or something like that, and I want the background to be neon green. That's a terrible idea, and if you just say, no, I'm not going to do that, what is your client going to do? They're going to fight you. Human beings do not like to hear the word no. We hate it. We get defensive. It's our idea. We have to protect it. Our egos are all fragile. If instead you say, yes, I hear what you're saying, a dog at the top, neon green, and we need to scope that, and we need to decide what color green specifically, and we need to decide which picture of your dog, and when can you schedule 3 hours with me, and it's paid discovery, by the way. Well, what can the client do? You've acknowledged their idea, but do they really want to do it? It buys you time, if nothing else. Even when you're working with your colleagues, when you're collaborating on any projects, when someone says a terrible idea, if you just say, no, that's a terrible idea, well, you've hurt their feelings, and they need to be defensive. They need to guard their idea. If you say, yes, we could do that, and we need to do the research to back it up, and we need to flesh it out, and we need to scope it, and we need to do these things, you've acknowledged it, and you've given yourself time to, well, maybe talk them out of it, or show them through research that, it's not the best of ideas, but without that knee-jerk reaction and fight. Moving on, second point. Starting with the obvious. In improv, we are building an entire world, an entire story, an entire show from nothing. We're getting on stage, maybe get a suggestion from the audience, and we build a whole world from there. But we have to start somewhere. Now, I watched a lot of improv, improvisational comedy, improvisational theater, and there's this phenomenon that happens where people think the scene does not start until they have found the scene. So there will be two players on stage milling about, doing something, saying lines of dialogue, and eventually it catches, and they're like, oh, this is the scene. This is what we're doing. But all the information before gets thrown out. They didn't start with the obvious. The best shows, there's two performers in Chicago, TJ and Dave. Best shows I've ever seen. They start completely neutral. They start looking at each other. And they start from the information that is there, the information that is clearly on stage, the same way the audience sees those performers. So I'm standing like this, and my partner's standing in another position. This means something. What does this mean? What does this mean to them? And we can build from that world. We can build from that information and start from the obvious thing. So the audience and the performers are all on the same page, at the same place, with the same information. How does this apply to development? Starting with the obvious means starting from what's obvious to your client, not what is obvious to you. Their reality is a very long history, other ideas, previous projects that have failed or succeeded, not just the discovery you've done for this particular point project. Stepping back and seeing, well, have they ever done a project like this before? Have you liked the developers you've worked with? Have you ever been satisfied with a project? It's a good place to start. Same way with internal projects, if you're working with a team. Stepping back and saying, well, not just the problem, the point we're trying to fix, but what's the obvious thing to my coworkers? What is the obvious thing to the company? What is the obvious thing to the project? And stepping back and realizing it's not your obvious, it is the obvious. Active listening is a kind of a terrible term because it implies that you're only listening, which is the act of hearing, hearing sound waves and interpreting them. It really means actively engaging in the moment. Again, I'll bring up TJ and Dave for the stagecraft. They start from completely neutral, so everything they do is completely absorbing what the other player is doing. And completely reflecting and building off of that information. They're seeing how are their eyebrows, how are their feet, how are their hands, at what tone did they say something. So for instance, if we start a scene and I say, patch me that pitcher of milk, versus pass the pitcher of milk, versus, oh, honey, would you be so kind as to lovingly pass me the pitcher of milk? Those are three completely different scene starts. Those are three completely different ideas, even though it's the exact same words, the exact same information. There's another, I'll get to him in a minute, but another improv guru in the world, Del Close, who said, we must behave on stage as if we are paranoid schizophrenics, where we see hidden meaning behind every word and see what the intention is. This is very, very true in any client or other work you're doing as a developer. What is making them want to do this project? What parts get them excited? If you're doing everything over email and Slack, you're missing the entire story. Only 7% of communication is language, or is the words themselves. Everything else is body language, intonation. Let's not forget, human beings have been communicating for well over 10,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. We've only had language, what is the way we think of language, for maybe 3,000, maybe 6,000, maybe 10,000, who knows. But a very small time compared to all of evolution. So, what I'm saying is get in front of the person that you're working with and they're working for. Don't rely on email or Slack. That's a great way to pass around links. It's a great way to change an image from your computer to this computer. It's a terrible way to understand what they want. When you're in a room with someone, you can hear what makes them nervous. You can hear what parts they're excited about, and you can dig into those parts and make sure that they're going to be very happy and very satisfied overall, or relieve those fears early on. So if you can't do a face-to-face meeting, sometimes you just can't. There is Skype, there is Zoom, there is GoToMeeting, there are 1,000 tools now. There's no excuse. If you're not doing discovery, if you're not doing communication face-to-face where you can see their eyes, you're not really communicating. You need to actively listen to them. Slightly less famous gentleman in the world, but one of my improv teachers, John Remack, said the best advice I'd ever gotten in all of improv to this day still. Start your scenes happy, healthy, and well. Or healthy, happy, and well. Improv has this notion of conflict where we expect that two characters will at some point be in a disagreement. There will be a point of contention that we need to get past, that we need to work through. If we start from there, it's boring. Now imagine you are in a cafe, and all of a sudden you hear two people fighting about something. It's distressing, because you know none of the context, you don't know who to root for, you don't know who you want to win, you don't even know what they're fighting about. I've seen so many improv scenes that have started out with a disagreement. And then we don't even know who the characters are. We don't know if we like them. We don't know which side we support. If instead we start with two characters that like each other a lot, that are on the same side, then they can go on an adventure. Maybe they'll disagree along the way. Maybe they will have a fight at some point, but then we'll get to know them. We'll get to appreciate them. Now, how does this apply to development? I will admit, this is the point that is the loosest of all the connections, but I am from San Francisco and I'm a hippie. So it's more about taking care of yourself. I'll ask a question now to you. Who here writes better code when you are angry? That guy. Always somebody in the crowd. And who here writes better code when you're feeling miserable, just sick and exhausted, even though that's how most of us write code? Exactly. We all know this. We all know this in our hearts. It's true. But how many of us have ever written or designed something while we're angry or very, very tired and sick? Yes, we all have. We've all been there. We've all had to go to work. We've all had to get the project done. Take care of yourself. If you're angry, go for a walk. If you need to resolve something with your coworkers before you work actively on a project or start a project, make sure you're doing that. Start the day happy, healthy, well. Whatever it does for you. I recommend meditation. I recommend mindfulness. There's various mindfulness training apps out there in the world. But make sure you're centered and happy and healthy and well as you're working. You'll make for much, much better code, much better projects. So, very quick side note. This is one of Darwin's most famous quotes. If you just look up Darwin quote, you'll see this a lot. He never said this. 1963, Leon C. Megason said this in a speech, paraphrasing. And for whatever reason, it's known as the most famous Darwin quote. So it's a reminder that the thing you might end up being the most famous for might not be something you actually did. Don't take it personally. Anyway, back on point. In improv, we have these formats. There is a format, the la ronde, which is the round, where you have two character scenes where people swap in and out one at a time. the Herald, the mother of all improv forms, the long-form improv forms, short-form games. There's many things you need to go to an improv show. You can see a variation on a lot of these forms. And they're great for setting things in motion, for giving a little bit of structure to the performer so they know what to do generally. If they're lost, they can go back to the form. The problem with them is many improvisers adhere to them no matter what, especially beginning improvisers. They will get out and you'll see them in their heads. You'll see them completely focused on, I need to do this, and now I need to do this, and now I need to do this, and they're very worried that that's the only way to do it. And as soon as an improviser on stage is in their head and thinking and having a hard time, well, the audience has compassion. The audience wants them to have a good time, and they start worrying. They start getting anxious. They start getting nervous. We forget sometimes on stage as performers that we're there for you, the audience. You are just as important as any other performers on the stage. And we need to serve you. We need to serve the piece we are doing. The best shows I have ever done didn't follow a form at all. We started following a form, but within a few minutes, we realized that's not what this audience needs. We need to serve them. So let's go with what they are enjoying. And those are the best shows. For development, we have these wonderful things called best practices, which are a mixed bag. I have a friend in the Drupal community, Tim Erickson from Minneapolis, or St. Paul, and he says, we say best practices, and what we really mean are very good idea practices based on the information we have. But that's a lot of words, so we shorten it to best practice. But the problem with best practice is that that means there's a one specific right way, a best way to do it. Versus, this is a good idea way based on my information. There can be a lot of good ideas, but only one best. Now, I pick on this next example a lot, but I'm a huge fan of two-factor authentication. Who uses two-factor authentication for all of their things? Good for you. For everyone else, look into it. It's very much worth it. Good security practices. But if you force that standard on everything you do, your end clients, say your client wants a nice blog about their cat, for whatever reason. And you force, all right, everything you do is going to require two-factor authentication. At some point, they're going to either figure out how to get around it or leave you and go to someone else that will actually do the project in a way that supports them, the customer. I'm not saying best practices are bad. There's a reason we call them best practices. But remember, sometimes we need to serve the piece. We need to serve the bigger picture, not just here's the set of standards that I am adhering to. Maybe another technology is the right decision. Maybe an integration with another tool is a better decision, even though you've never done it that way. One of my colleagues, Michelle Creasy, says it very elegantly. The best developers have very strong opinions held loosely. Be ready to change if it comes down to it. Here's Del Close. Your job as an improviser is always to make the other player look good. There is an award in Chicago called the Jeff Award. And the Jeff Award is given to the best improviser of the year by polls and their colleagues. And the first person who ever won it got on stage and said, well, I guess I wasn't doing my job, thank you, and sat down. Because our job is to make the other players look amazing. Because if they look amazing and then they make us look amazing, everyone looks amazing. Everyone's having a good time, and the audience enjoys that. Well, who are the other players as a developer? I think there are a couple. First is your end user. You should strive to make your end users look like geniuses. If your UX makes them have to stop and think, you have done something wrong. You should be able to go through an interface seamlessly. Make them feel like they're geniuses, even if they've never seen it before. But the other, I think, more important player to make look good is the developer who comes next. This is support, and this is anyone that will build on top of your code. Your comments in your code and your support documentation. Think about not the next generation, not the generation after that, but 3 years from now when someone's still using that version in the wild and someone needs to look something up. If they can look like a genius in that moment, they're going to do better, their clients are going to like them better, and ultimately, you're going to look better by making them look better. And finally, the last point before we'll move on to more fun things is accepting failure. I almost called this embracing failure. That's what we call it in improv. There are no mistakes in improv, not at all. There are simply happy accidents that you can get information from. You embrace the accident, you embrace the mistakes. Well, we can do that in improv because we have the safety of a stage. If I go like that a bunch of times and my colleague falls down, no one thinks he died. He on stage, his character fell down. There's a safety to it. Well, in development, we also have stage. If you're doing everything in a live production environment, of course, failure is terrible. It has a lot of consequences. There's things you'll have to do to get back from that failure. But if you have the safety of a stage, the safety of a development environment, safety of a stage environment, go nuts. Why not just update all? If you're using WP CLI, just flag all. It might work. It might not, but yeah, this guy's done it. But if it does work, well, you've saved a lot of time. And if you do it in a safe environment and it works, well, then just push that to production. The other part is being afraid to fail. And sometimes we will whiteboard things for far too long before we'll just get up and try it. One of my clients a few years ago when I was from Pantheon said that they spent 3 days going back and forth on the benefits of trying this thing on our platform. And at the end, it took them 10 minutes, and they were thrilled with the results. And I'll never forget that story. He said, I can't believe we wasted that much time if we'd have just tried it. And if it failed, accepted that, instead of worrying and preparing for a failure that never came. So don't waste your time preparing for failures that won't show up. Because they might not. They might, but protect yourself as well. All right. Now, normally, I would have everyone stand up and participate in this. But unfortunately, I am limited in time today, and there's a lot of you, and it would get very, very loud in here. So what I'm going to ask for is a few volunteers to do a few exercises with me up here on stage. About 3, 5 people. Anyone, you already know who you are. Come on down. Yes, brave. Yes, got another one. Yes, yes, and yes. And we'll call it at that. I don't need any more after you. So perfect. Unless you really wanted to, if you really wanted to. Hello. We have a secondary mic here. Is this live? What's your name?
Kevin.
What?
Kevin.
I'm Chris. Hi.
I'm Marie-Hélène.
Bogdan.
Okay, so I'm going to give this to you. And we're all going to have to speak very loud, except for me. You'll hold it up like this, because you're all going to aim that way. And we're going to play a game called I Love. I Love works like this. It is very simple. You're simply going to say something you love. That's it. And the sentence will just start with I love. I love WordCamp Europe. And then whatever order.
Okay, I love beer.
He loves beer.
I love wine.
Loves wine.
I love design.
Love design.
I love coding.
Love bowling.
I love vegetarian food.
I love terminal stuff.
I love CLIs.
Oh, I love pizzas.
I love good APIs.
I love croissant.
I love exercising.
I love breaks. I also love croissants, sorry.
I love avocados.
I love Photoshop.
I love Cancun Beach.
I love CSS.
I love good music.
I love rock.
I love all of you on this stage. Now, now we'll end there just for now. If you could hold the mic just continually. So why this exercise? What is this? What am I doing? This is an exercise for happy, healthy, well. Because how do all of you feel right now? Better. Hyped. Good.
Static, yeah.
When you say things you... What's that? You don't feel any different?
No.
You were already feeling great, Kevin. This guy's got the right attitude, everybody. Got the right attitude. When we say things we love, it triggers the chemicals in our brain to say, yes, I do love that thing. And how many in the audience heard something they're like, oh, yes, me too? Everyone. Now, how many of you, and you already did it once, how many of you wanted to add something onto that thing that someone else said? You heard an idea and like, oh yes, me too, and this other thing. Exactly, that is how it works. If we played the opposite of this, if we played I hate, we would all shut down, we would feel miserable and tired. But how many times do we talk to our colleagues and just complain, just commiserate with them about how terrible a project was? Well, it puts us in this spiral. I recommend this game for your meetings. We play a variation of this with my team online in Slack, where we freely associate words together, and it's one group mind, because we're all on the same page now. I feel like we're in a team now. Thank you so much for being part of my presentation. I'll keep you up here, though, because just for the sake of time, I'm going to do one other thing. Why am I not moving? There we go. This is called a shared memory exercise. And you know what? I'm going to call an audible what they do. So give these wonderful people a round of applause. You can go back to your seats. You can go back to your seats. All right, I'm going to call a slight audible on this, just for the sake of time. An audible, if you're not familiar with American football, is you're changing the play right before it happens. And for this, I would like to invite Bridget, actually. If you could join me up here on stage. Bridget Willard, everyone. So I didn't tell you we were doing this. Hold the mic close.
Hi.
Hey, Bridget. So shared memory works like this. There's a game where we're going to invent a story.
Okay.
And I would invite all of you to play this, and if you want to come up to me later and play this, I am happy to do it. Just sake of time, we don't have time for everyone today. So all I want you to say is, remember the time we went to Mexico. And then I'm going to say yes, and then add something onto that. And then you will add another line. You'll say yes, and whatever.
I'm in.
Okay, so you say, remember the time we
Hey, Dwayne, remember the time we went to Mexico?
Yes, and we bought those donkeys from that guy.
Yeah, and then I was wishing I wore better pants.
Yes, and then we stopped at the pants store, but they were all out of pants.
Yeah, because they didn't have my size. Oh, shoot. Yes, and they didn't have my size, but I bought a skirt instead.
Yes, and I bought a skirt, and we ended up losing the donkeys right after that, though.
Yes, and we took an epic selfie.
Yes, and that selfie got retweeted by Justin Bieber.
Yes, and we did a duet with Justin Bieber at WC Karaoke.
Woo! What
was
was the point of this? Yes, it was a wonderful plug.
Thank
What
you.
was the point of this? I'll still hang up for a second. This is the idea of let's take information and add to it. Let's take information and build a world on top of it. Let's play a slight variation on this, just to prove a point.
Okay.
In fact, I'll just start this time, because now you know how it's played.
Okay.
Hey, Bridget, remember that time we debugged that WordPress website?
Yes, and it was a long process with lots of pizza and beer.
Yes, and we bought so much pizza that we were too stuffed to actually continue working that night and fell asleep.
Yes, and we woke up and went for coffee.
Yes, and over coffee, you realized that it was actually a bad function deep within a plugin.
Yes, and we deactivated all of our plugins and reactivated them one by a time.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bridget. Give him a round of applause. You can go back to your seat. So what was the point of that? How many of you have ever been stuck at a whiteboard or in Slack and beating your head against the wall and have no idea how to go forward with something? Why not just pretend you've already solved it? Why not just play this game? Why not just say, hey, remember the time we solved this problem? Yes, and we did this. Yes, and we did this. It'll at least give you ideas. It will at least be fun for a few minutes instead of being frustrating. There is an entire library of improv games in the world that you can go, and I highly recommend studying improv, studying this, and I'm happy to talk much more about this after my talk, and you can go read my blog series on this. But to reiterate, there's exercises you can do to put you in the right mindset to, say yes and, to build worlds with people, to remember to start with the obvious, their obvious, not your obvious, to actively listen, engage people, not just hear the words, and not just read what's on a screen, but actively engage with a human being, to remember to take care of yourself and start happy, healthy, and well with things, to serve the peace, don't get caught up in best practices, to make the other players look good, and the other players are your users and people supporting you far into the future. And lastly, don't be afraid of failure. Failure is a gift. You can't learn unless you're making mistakes. The bigger the mistake, the easier it is to spot the problem and to learn. So don't be afraid to fail, but fail in a safe environment. Use staging environments and development environments. I have some other ideas. Again, you can get these slides over at mcdwayne.com, some books about improv. The last one's actually about actively listening, how to read faces, how to study the reactions people have and understand what's going on in their heads based on their facial expressions. It's a very good book. But again, I was Dwayne. I come from San Francisco. I do improv. I love karaoke. WC Karaoke for the win. It's a hashtag. It's a lifestyle. And you can find all my stuff at mcdwayne.com.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. It was so entertaining, and yeah, I had a great time, and I was enjoying your talk so much. So much new points of view, and yeah, I think the audience was also. So I just want you not to leave the room now, because there is short time to ask 1 or 2 questions to Dwayne. So if you want, you can use the standing microphones here in front or in the upper rows. Is there any question? Yeah, there's somebody coming. Or is he just want to leave the room?
Oh, we got a question.
So, oh, come on, super.
You were talking about micro.
Where are you?
Expressions and.
Oh, there you
I see you.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you up there. Yeah, you can.
Yes.
Please go for it.
Paige from Cancun. I love your talk, by the way.
Thank you.
You were talking a little about micro-expressions, and which is the book that you recommend for that?
Oh, it's a textbook, actually, by Sylvan Tompkins. Affect Imagery Consciousness Theory by Sylvan S. Tompkins. He's not the only person that wrote about it. If you look up I forget his name, Lovheim's Emotional Cube is how I discovered him. It's an emotional theory based on brain chemistry that maps to this affect imagery consciousness theory, where there's only 9 things the human face can actually do. Everything else is a variation and a mixture of those 9 things. But once you break down reactions there, you can see, oh, that person's afraid, or that person's angry, or that person's happy, or that person's engaged. Very quick. It's extremely useful on stage, and that's how I discovered it as a coach and a teacher.
Really, thanks again, and also for the experience of the I Love game. That was good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. You can ask a question, please.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
My name is Sami from Finland. How do you deal with the person in your team who is always negative? Is the only way to fire him or her, or is there something that you could do to help overcome with the negativity?
If I could answer this question, I would be making a lot more money being a business consultant. This is a hard question. Sometimes people don't know they're negative. Sometimes people don't quite realize it. I have had very mixed experiences as a coach, as a teacher of improv, with explaining to people that you're being a little more negative than you need to be, and they are very negative reactions to that. I've also had people thank me for pointing it out. So everyone will react differently. Some people are just mean. Some people are just bad people. I hate to say that. I think everyone's redeemable at the end of the day. But try engaging them in non-traditional ways would be my first thought. If you've never gone bowling with them, invite them bowling. If you've never had a beer with them, make sure you go out and have a beer. There's something behind that negativity. There's something, maybe it's just you need to be nicer to them, make them feel safer. Sometimes people are negative in defense, that they're trying to guard themselves, and if they think they shut down every idea around them, then nothing new will get in. But that would be my best advice, is try engaging them in creative ways. Playing I Love with people. Actually, when I was giving this talk in Chicago for MidCamp, which is a Drupal event, someone came up afterward and said, the person I did the exercise, the I Love exercise with, as a duo, I worked with them 7 years ago and hated them. And it just turns out today, we have a lot in common we never talked about. So find other commonalities. It makes them more human, and maybe that's an answer.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dwayne McDaniel, give a big applause. I have some more important information to you regarding Matt Mullenwake's talk this afternoon at 3. So as you know, or probably know, there's going to be a live stream in track 2 because we expect not everybody fitting in this track number 1 Pullmann. And I just wanted to let you know that we are not going to take questions in track 2. So if you maybe know already now that you're going to have a question for Matt, then you have to come here and being in this room. The closing remarks are also going to be live streamed in track 2. So if you don't fit everybody in here, there's also the possibility to hear and see them in track 2. Regarding the after party this evening, I'm going to come up with this all day, or Simon is going to follow this afternoon in this track, coming with it. You have to bring your badges. So please, please, please don't forget to bring your badges with you. And don't forget to get your swag in the Houseman building. So there's t-shirts, there's socks, and as I heard, it's not very crowded over there. We are going to continue in this room at 11, and we will have Boone, Gorges here on stage, and he's going to talk about the pernicious myth of the code poet. So I'm expecting to see you here again in about some minutes. And there's the workshop with a side ground starting at the same time in the Houseman building. And now the meetup, the Tribe meetup, content creators and bloggers is going to start. So if you want to be there, it's now. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, again. I would like to ask you for some help. There is WordCamp Europe just tweeted about an occupational psychology research, which is very important about burnouts and stress. And Catalina is Catalina Alvarez, is it correct? Catalina Alvarez is sitting here. Big applause for Catalina. She's doing this research, and we would love everybody in here filling out the form. And you can find it on Twitter at the WordCamp Euro account. Catalina, do you maybe want to say some words? You can come up here and talk into my microphone.
Thank you.
We find solutions for everybody.
Hey, everyone. I just want to say that it's a really important research. It's the first research, scientific research in WordPress community. And it's really important to complete the survey because if no one completes the survey, there's no research. So it's easy as that. So thank you so much, and I hope you have fun filling it.
Thank you, Catalina. Big applause for Catalina, please. So we continue with our morning sessions. And our next speaker is, believe it or not, one of the 50 best crossword puzzle solvers in the United States. The father of 2 small children is technically a freelancer, although he has founded a one-man consulting firm called HG that provides technical services around WordPress. He's also a WordPress core committer and lead developer of BodyPress. Having done his doctoral studies in philosophy, he read a lot about philosophical aesthetics and the foundations of art. So he has good conceptual framework for thinking about the concepts of art and poetry as they apply to software development work or not. The motto "Code is poetry" has always bugged him. And today, he will unpack his annoyance to see if he's just a curmudgeon or if there's really something wrong with the motto. So please welcome on stage Boone Gorges.
Good morning. Merci de m'avoir invité. Here I am. There I am. I have a purple line, but we're okay with that. There we go. If you have been around WordPress for a while, or if you have looked at the lanyards that are holding your name badges, then you've seen this slogan emblazoned. It says, "Code is poetry." As Carole said in my introduction, it's always kind of irked me a little bit, so I wanted to take some time today to look into what it is that we really mean when we say this. Do we mean it as a metaphor? Do we mean it literally? What does it do for us? And to talk about maybe some alternative ways of thinking about the work that we do that capture some of the spirit of this without maybe capturing the bad stuff. But first, let's talk about the good stuff. When you look at a piece of poetry next to a beautiful piece of code like this one, it's just something, it's like looking at pictures of 2 distant relatives, and you know that they're kind of related, and maybe it's the nose, or maybe it's the big ears or something, but there's something about them that seem very similar. Both code and poetry share the properties of being non-conversational. They depart from the conventions of regular speech. This is part of the power and part of the distinctiveness of both code and poetry. They're both syntactically complex in the sense that they depart from the regular rules of putting words together, but they often introduce new conventions, new rules for the ways that you can put words and symbols and characters and punctuation in certain places in order to form new kinds of meaning. Code and poetry both share a certain density of meaning. They both have, they manage to pack a lot of stuff in a relatively small amount of space. Like when I'm up here talking, as you're reading the transcript, it's blah, 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 but if I have a bit of code, I can express all of that quite elegantly. Poet and poetry, or code and poetry, are both have a sense of rhythm. They have a sense of symmetry. They have the same sorts of patterns. We have line breaks. We have indentation. And they both have the qualities of elegance and concision. You know, a good piece of code or a good piece of poetry expresses what it needs to do without wasting any space or without wasting any CPU cycles. I like to sum all of this up by saying that they share a common texture. These are sort of surface qualities of code and poetry that make them feel, these are like the big ears and the nose, that when you're looking at the two pictures, they feel like, well, it's these surface texture qualities that make code and poetry feel alike. So when we say code is poetry and we use it as sort of a mantra for ourselves, this is part of what we're evoking. But what I think is really going on at a deeper level is not just saying that, well, code is kind of like poetry, but it's more about us as coders and how we see ourselves. It's more about the people who wear things like this. Software developers have sort of a perpetual crisis of identity. The work that we do is relatively new. We don't have a really good tradition of work in which to situate ourselves. We'd like to think of ourselves as sort of rugged individualists. We are able to forge into a great wilderness of the blank screen, and we forge something beautiful, some beautiful jewel, where previously there was absolutely nothing. This is a very romantic idea of what it means to be a software developer, but I think it drives a lot of the pride and the dignity that we take in the work that we do. We're not just cogs in some machine, but we are somehow creative and romantic individuals. But this is a little bit at odds with the daily realities, the stuff that we actually have to shovel when we do our daily work. You know, 90% of my time is spent fixing bugs that came up because I didn't have sufficient test coverage, or arguing with clients about scope creep, or sacrificing my grand and beautiful architectural visions for the sake of meeting a deadline. Now, these things don't feel like the sort of cowboy riding his horse through the mountain pass, rugged, beautiful individualism that we like to think of ourselves as embodying when we do our software development work. And I think that when we say that code is poetry, it's kind of a coping mechanism for this torn identity. It's a way of saying that, yes, my daily job involves a lot of suffering. I do suffer, but like the artist, I suffer for the purpose of my art. I'm able to give it some sort of higher purpose. In this sense, when I say code is poetry, it's not so much a description of the work that I do, but it's an affirmation for the way that I want to think about the work that I do, and a way that I want to think about myself as somebody who's chosen software development as a worthwhile and dignified career. But the problem is that code is not poetry. It's code. It's something else. It's simply not true. There's something fundamental about the way that poetry and the artistic process works, and in particular, the way that the artist communicates with the audience for his or her art, that really doesn't match up with the way that software developers work at all, and I think it's important to explore this. When you see an object like this, you may have certain sort of visceral reactions to it. You may think that it's beautiful or not beautiful. You may think that it's not a very good picture. It's not very proportionate. But once you want to start having an artistic judgment about it, you have to enter into a different kind of relationship with this object than just simply looking at it as if it were just an object of pure beauty. You have to ask yourself, who created this object? Well, this was Picasso in 1921. But in order to understand this as an artistic object, you have to know that, Picasso was a Spaniard working in France. You have to understand that synthetic cubism was a reaction to various arts movements of the time and art movements that came before. You have to understand that Picasso knew that when he painted this, he was painting for an audience of critics and other artists and museum goers who were going to have a sense of history about where Cubism fits alongside other movements of the early 20th century. Now, maybe some of us don't have a complete understanding of this at all, or maybe some of us have a very misleading understanding of it. But the point is that in order to think about this as a piece of art instead of just a pretty object, we have to engage with this sort of relationship, consciously or unconsciously, with the artist as sort of an author who's doing something to us. This becomes even more obvious when we think about some art that comes later on in the 20th century and is really purely conceptual. If I see a picture of a can of soup on une affiche, on a poster when I walk down the streets of Paris, I may feel certain emotions. I may feel hunger. But if I see the exact same image, pixel for pixel or paintbrush for paintbrush, the exact same image on an Andy Warhol painting, I have a very different reaction. And the reaction, it may be a number of things. I may say, oh, the banality of commercial life, or I may say the banality of Andy Warhol. But I have a very different reaction from the exact same visual image. So something is happening here, and what happens is that I understand, when I look at this image in the context of being a piece of art, that Andy Warhol created this trying to do something to me, trying to make me feel something, trying to make me think about something. Whether he succeeds or doesn't succeed is another question entirely. But my experience as the audience for this piece of art is fundamentally guided by the fact that I am aware of the author and I'm aware of the author's intentions. So here's something maybe we're more comfortable with. Contrast this with software. WordPress has many millions of users, a large percentage of whom don't really know what WordPress is. And even a larger percentage of them don't know and don't care who created WordPress. And they don't care what the creators of WordPress were trying to convey when they created WordPress. It's simply not relevant to the experience of using WordPress. In fact, when we build software, we often say that we like to have it get out of the way. Software is successful when it is transparent to the user. This is the opposite of the artistic experience. The artistic experience is grounded in the knowledge on behalf of the audience that the author intended something. But in software, we actually want to hide. The author should disappear. And if it becomes a totally seamless experience for the user, where they can just write, or where they can do their work or have their fun without thinking about the software and its authors, that means we've done a good job. So from a social point of view, this is a completely different sense of what code is than poetry. So that's the end of my argument. Now, it sounds a little bit crotchety, and you may be saying, okay, that's very nice. That's a lot of very fancy concepts that you've introduced. What's the point? Code is poetry is a nice little slogan. It makes us feel good about the work that we do. Maybe it's not true, but maybe truth isn't the important thing here. And I'm not just an old man yelling at a cloud. What I want to argue here is that there are some facts about code as poetry that actually lead to bad results. And adhering too closely to the idea of code as poetry and coders as artists can lead us to some bad results in software. Let's talk about just a couple of these ideas. And this is not meant to be exclusive, but it should give you a sense of some of the features of poetry and art that do not translate to good software, one of which is metaphor. This is the idea that we say one thing, one word, and we mean something else. When the poet says, Cueillez dès aujourd'hui les roses de la vie, he's not talking about roses, right? It's not an actual rose that you're picking. There's something else, and it's this experience of taking one word and moving through it to get to another meaning. That's much of the power of poetry. It's much of the emotional power. We don't do this in software. Have you ever tried to debug something that came down to a variable name? Metaphor is not something that we enjoy using in software development. Vagueness is another example. Sometimes you read a piece of poetry, and the poetry can have more than one signification at a time. It can have more than one meaning. Or sometimes there can be 3 or 4 meanings, and you're not sure when you read the words which path you should go down. Now, this experience of feeling the uncertainty of exposition is part of the aesthetic experience of reading a piece of poetry or viewing a piece of art. This is not something that we like when we read code. When you read code, you want to be able to understand it. We look for clarity rather than some sort of artistic vagueness. Inscrutability, that difficulty to read. Sometimes poetry is hard to read. Sometimes it's exhausting to read. But that feeling of exhaustion, of struggling and wrestling with a piece of poetry or with a piece of art in order to get meaning out of it, is often a part of the aesthetic experience of engaging with the art. But our code is exactly the opposite of this. If you have to struggle in order to understand my code, that indicates a failure on my part as a software developer. Novelty. Software developers, well, artists are often a success when you see them create something totally new. If I read something in a poem, if I read a metaphor or a simile or a word that I've never seen before, that's part of an aesthetic experience that brings value to the poem. When I see something new in a piece of code, that's not a benefit, that's a cost. You know, if I introduce a new API, a new naming convention, a new architectural construct, these things have costs, and we only introduce them if the benefits of that novelty outweigh the costs. It's not a benefit in itself to introduce new kinds of things. But these are all sort of the surface texture issues that I talked about before. The real issue here is that when we think of ourselves as some sort of grand artists, when we think of ourselves as engaging in an endeavor that ought to be judged by the standards of artistic excellence, we do things that don't really match very well with what we ought to be doing as software developers. Just to take a few examples. Artists are necessarily, in order to be successful, individualistic. They develop their own personal styles. They try to make themselves stand out from their peers, and to the extent that they do so, they count as successful artists. But we try to do exactly the opposite. Artistic license is not a virtue in the world of software development, and we have tools like coding standards and shared architectural patterns and shared naming conventions and things like that that enforce the ideas of conformity. This is not a bad kind of conformity. It's one that saves time and that makes our lives easier. But it's in a grand contrast to the sort of artistic individualism that we value in poets. Closely related to this is the idea of ego. It's difficult to say about an artist that the artist has done something wrong, or that the idea of the artist is somehow incorrect or inappropriate. And this has the effect of allowing artists to sort of set their ego at the center of their work, so that the value of the work that they do, in part, comes from their value as people. And this may or may not be a good thing in art, but it certainly is not a good thing in software development. I mean, think about something like code review. If you are so attached to your idea of what code ought to look like or feel like or how it ought to work, if you think that your ideas are somehow so valuable and so perfectly formed the moment that they come from your mouth or from your precious fingertips, that you are unable to be criticized on those without taking some sort of mortal offense, this is obviously not a good way to collaborate on software. It's not the way that we want to build software, especially not in a community atmosphere. So it requires a certain amount of humility. A good software developer needs to be humble in the same way that a good artist is allowed to let his ego shine forth. Isolation and collaboration. There's a kind of myth or mythos about artists like Monet at Giverny, kind of cloistering themselves off into a place where they're all by themselves, surrounded by beauty and by nature, and they're able to produce great art. And when they come out, when they step out of their cocoon, here you have something beautiful. So there's a similar mythos about software developers, that they hide away in their rooms with a gallon of soda and headphones on, and they crouch over their keyboards for a few nights, and they come out with a beautifully formatted piece of code. Well, this isn't really how we build software. It is true that generally only one person is typing on a keyboard at a time. So there is a sense in which isolation is an important part of the development process. But where software is really built is in communities, whether that's an open source community like WordPress, where we iterate and improve on each other's patches, or whether this is in your internal teams, or even if it's just you working on something for a client who will then give you feedback and you work in a collaborative environment with your users. So not only is code not poetry, but believing in this phrase too much, hanging too strongly to this notion of code as poetry, could push us in the direction of embracing development techniques and embracing a way of existing with our peers that is not healthy to the way that we ought to be developing software. But remember, this was supposed to be an affirmation. There was something good about code as poetry. It gave us a way to conceptualize the dignity and the pride that we want to feel and that we should feel in the work that we do. So I want to find a way to capture that idea without relying so heavily on a metaphor that I think is problematic. So the first part of this I want to look at is meaningfulness. One of the nice things about art is that you say, oh, I'm an artist, and everyone is like, ah, because the idea of being an artist is so sort of imbued with importance. But there's a lot of meaning in the world. We like to call ourselves engineers, which I think is a little annoying sometimes, but one thing I really like about the word engineer is that it denotes a clear lineage, a clear connection with people who build houses and bridges and tunnels and airplanes and things that actually matter, right? We build things that matter too. We build things that are used by other people. They're real physical objects in the world, even if they're instantiated in ones and zeros and magnetic bits on a drive. They're real objects, and they have a real effect on real people. And this is where the meaning of these objects comes from. So you don't have to say that you're producing some great work of art in order to say that it's somehow meaningful or important. The importance of the software that we write is even more manifest, even more concrete than that. It comes from its use. Code is beautiful. Well, this is another thing that is really clear when people say that code is poetry. They mean, oh, isn't this nice? And certainly it is the case that we try to build beautiful software, and we try to write beautiful code. Sometimes we don't succeed. Sometimes I don't succeed. But we try, and we want to find a way to capture this. Poetry is one way to do this, but there is beauty everywhere. And most beauty in the world has nothing to do with art. We see in nature symmetry and patterns and contrast and proportion, the same features that we can see and identify in our own code, and identify that as a real and valuable form of beauty. An even better way to think about beauty in software design is to think about our friends, the designers, because the designers are able to think about this in a way that we are not. They come to the table more conceptually prepared. They know that the beauty of an object does not simply lie in its sort of sex appeal. It's not about the prettiness. But the beauty of an object lies fundamentally, of a designed object, is in its how well it suits the purpose for which it is designed. So the Eames chair, very famous design, it has pretty lines, but that's not what makes it a beautiful design. What makes it beautiful is that it accomplishes its goal of being a chair in a simple way, in a durable way, in a way that's comfortable. And it's this kind of appropriateness for its purpose and the elegance of suiting a purpose in a concise way. This is a kind of beauty that designers recognize and that we should embrace as well as a legitimate and really wonderful kind of beauty that we can aim for in the code that we write. When I think about code as poetry, and when I think about something that, another way of thinking about code that captures some of the ideas, the word that I keep coming back to is craft. I mean something specific by craft here, the skillful creation of useful objects. And the word useful here is critical, because art can have an effect on the world, but almost by definition, artistic objects are not meant to be immediately useful. The painting on your wall may bring you joy, but you don't use it as a doorstop. Designed objects crafted objects are meant to be used in the world. And what I like about this notion of craft and thinking about ourselves as craftspeople rather than as some sort of artists is that it gives us a clear connection with others in our community and the way that craftspeople are embedded in the society at large. You know, like I said earlier, the idea of software development is something brand new. And we have to find a way to fit ourselves in and think about the way that we fit in around the people around us. But we already have a sense of how people who build homes and ships and people who build bridges, we have a sense of how these people fit into our society. And thinking of ourselves as craftspeople allows us to be contiguous with this idea of craft. There's a couple specific aspects of this that I think are really worth highlighting before I wrap things up. Craft and thinking about our work as craft, instead of thinking about it as some lofty artistic endeavor, helps to bring us closer to a more grounded sense of class. There's this weird and really scary tendency in the software development community for people with technical skills to think of themselves as being somehow better than mere mortals. The idea that, think about the stereotypical tech CEO who, because they've achieved some sort of technical success or some sort of business success, that they therefore can remake society in their own image. This is called disruption, by the way, right? So why? Why do we think that this is okay? Well, when we think about ourselves as craftspeople, instead of thinking of ourselves as some sort of artists or some sort of conceptual workers, we're craftspeople. We're building real things. This connects us much more closely to the general class of individuals. We, too, are we mortals. If you prick us, do we not bleed? Craft is inherently collaborative in a way that art is. It's a little bit harder to say this about art. There's a long history and tradition in the world of craftsmanship for working together, because there are some objects that are simply too big or too complicated. A house, or a ship, or a computer, or a content management system. They're too complex for one person to build on their own. They require collaboration. It's part of the process of craft and part of the tradition of craft for people to work together. By thinking of our work as craft, it puts collaboration as in front. It makes it the first strategy rather than something that we resort to only when the other strategies of individuality have failed. And finally, craft, and the idea that what we do is constitutes craft, situates us in the broader world in a way that I feel is healthy for the way that we view our work. To go back to bridges. A bridge may or may not be beautiful, but what counts as success in a bridge is that you keep people dry. If the bridge crumbles, you've failed. That's objectively true. If the bridge does not crumble, it's objectively true that you have succeeded. It has an effect in the real world, and the criteria for success are non-negotiable. We, too, are building things that make a difference in the world. When we talk about client work, your client has needs. They have goals. They may have business goals. Maybe it's a nonprofit. They have educational goals. Your software helps them meet those goals. Your software is not an end in itself. When we talk about WordPress, WordPress has the mantra of democratizing publishing, which is probably something I could give another talk about. But what I really like about that is that it emphasizes that WordPress itself is not the point. The point is giving a tool to other people so that they can do the things that they need to do out there. Remembering that what we do is craft reminds us that what we do really matters in this way. And it reminds us that we have a responsibility to keep the real-life consequences of our work in mind as we do it. This is another way of bringing a sort of dignity and sense of responsibility and pride to the work that we do without relying on a metaphor that I think is less than ideal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Boone. Very, very interesting talk. And are you feeling better now? You're not a curmudgeon anymore?
Oh, I'm a curmudgeon, yeah.
No, I haven't experienced you in that way.
I'm incorrigible.
Good, good. So, I'm quite sure there are some questions for you here in the audience. I think you already know the procedure. There are standing microphones here in the front rows. And I'm feeling like a stewardess. It's like, so also in the upper rows, there are 2 standing microphones. And we would love to have some questions here for Boone, if there are.
The argument that I presented was so sort of cohesive and concise that I could see how there would be no room for argumentation. And,
You have been so clear.
that wasn't meant to be a joke. Yeah.
So my question was, if you're better now and you're not a curmudgeon anymore. So,
that's a good. That is a good question.
I don't have another one.
I will give you a good answer. So code is poetry. Just autobiographically has always annoyed me a little bit, and the process of preparing this forced me to think about a more productive way to engage with the work that I do, so that I can feel good not only about the things that I produce, but feel good about the process of producing them. So for me, it's been healthy. I'm less of a curmudgeon. So.
Oh, we have a question here. Please go on.
I really love the argument. I can totally connect with it, and I love the choice of the word craft. However, it seems that somebody is there before us. There's a company that uses this as their motto for developers. Then there's also, a sense of having a motto that kind of unites the community, and when it connects with another brand, might be problematic.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great point. I was not necessarily promoting this as the new thing that we print on lanyards. I think that code is poetry. Look, it's nice. People know what this means. I think the point is that it's a metaphor, right? And it's meant, you take away from the metaphor what you need to take away from it, but if you start adhering to it and seeing it as a guiding principle for the work that you do, it can lead you down paths that may go against the goals that you're trying to accomplish. So that's my main point, but I take your point very well. I'm not a marketer, so this was not intended to be the development of a new slogan for WordPress.
Thank you. Andre?
Hello.
Hello.
I want to say it's great to see your talk in person. To have this opportunity. And I kind of, a bit of not a question, a bit of my playful suggestions. If right here on the spot we said we're changing the slogan for WordPress development, like let's make new slogan right here, right now, what you would say the slogan for WordPress development should be?
Oh my God, you want this to be serious or a joke?
I'm okay with the joke, like other people might not be.
How about we shall survive?
Thank you. Love it.
Thank you. So, okay, I think we're done then. Or do you have any remarks? Oh, there's somebody up there. It's the second time I do not see you. I'm so sorry. Go on.
I'm beginning to wonder if I'm here really.
You are real.
This is a question that arises from us. Okay, so how do you... There's a thing to be said about repetition. When you start to do the same kind of thing again and again and again, you're looking for shortcuts or better ways to do this, and this turns into developing your own tools. And I have heard other developers in other projects related to PHP saying that this is a good practice to develop your own set of tools. Thinking of as a developer or an engineer, as a craftsman, I believe that this is the right thing to look, the right way to look at things. What will you say about we motivating ourselves to create our own tools to prevent us from repetition and open sourcing that? Or what will you recommend in the aspect of searching for tools for people that may have the same problems as us?
Thank you for the very thoughtful question. I will start with an anecdote that seems unrelated. I was reading an article just while in the process of preparing this talk about the jazz saxophone player Sonny Rollins, who is now 85. And part of this profile documented how he was legendary in the jazz community for his practice regimen. So while most virtuosos, they obviously practice a lot when they're very young, but then they get to a certain sort of virtuosic skill, and they're able to coast on that. They play gigs, but maybe they're not running scales. But Sonny Rollins practiced for 8 to 10 hours a day, every day a week, into and through his 40s. And the way that he described it, he didn't use the word craft to describe this, but what I take from this is that for somebody like Sonny Rollins, and I'm sure many, many artists like him, that you can take the work that you do and artistic work and divide it into its two constituent parts. One is the creative part, and that is, or at least can transcend to the level of art. But the other part is craft. So inside of art, there always is craft. And the process of honing one's craft is really critical to the process of being able to attain excellence, whether that's artistic excellence or otherwise. So to bring this around to your question, I think what you're getting at is that I suggested that individuality and the idea of creating your own tools is maybe can be counterproductive. But what I'm suggesting is that these sorts of exercises of, let's say, building your own version of a virtual DOM renderer like React when React already exists. This can be an exercise a little bit like running those scales. That is a way of honing your craft so that when it comes time to actually perform the tasks that you need to perform, client work or working on an open source project or whatever the case may be, that you've actually taken those technical skills to such a level that you'll have the kind of virtuosity that you need to perform your end goals. So I'm not against people exercising artistic or individual sort of freedom in terms of the way that they develop their own tools or whether they use existing tools to save time. But I think as long as it's done with a spirit of self-improvement and bettering one's own skills instead of reinventing the wheel, then I think it's a very healthy thing to do.
Thank you. We have a last question from over here.
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. I can just briefly say that before I began working as a software developer, I was a musician for 10 years. And I can say that's also an industry that's very much plagued by the idea of the artist. It doesn't really help anyone, I think. But I do have a question, which is, there's also another comparison which is often used for developers, which I really hate, and that's the idea of the ninja. I fucking hate that.
You all know what ninjas are, right? French. They're assassins, right?
I know, and they're also like wicked people. I don't know, do you have any feelings about this?
Well, I think the idea is that, the way that I always imagined it, somebody, is it Wu or something that has like a little ninja who's very stealthy? I think he sneaks in and he gets your bugs. I think that's the idea, right? That's how I always imagined it. But I agree, it's a little, it's cute. Again, it's like code as poetry. There's nothing particularly wrong with it until you start actually unpacking the metaphor and trying to use those as guiding principles. I don't know that I have anything really profound to say about it that wouldn't be offensive to some people in the room, but I agree with you that it's highly imperfect. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you here on stage.
Thanks.
Boone, Gorges.
Thanks.
We're going to have soon our last speaker for this morning here on stage, which will be Andrea Middleton, and she's going to talk about how WordPress communities are built. We got some questions in the meanwhile concerning the after party again. I want to remind you again that you have to bring your badge. You have to bring your badge. Otherwise, it will be very difficult or impossible to enter. And for all the parents who brought their lovely children with them, we simply do not recommend to bring children under 10 years. But if you want to bring them, we just wanted to remind you, it will be okay for us, even if we don't recommend to do so. Just be aware that it is a party with alcohol, and please take care of your little ones. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Would you please go to find a seat and make yourself comfortable? Because we're going to start with our last session for this morning on our second day at WordCamp Europe. Our last speaker for today also comes from the United States, where she was a champion fencer in high school. She has had a lot of different jobs in her life so far, among others as a Greenpeace activist, high school English teacher in Mexico, or a liquor salesperson in the Caribbean. In 2006, she got hired by Automatic to work on WordPress project community efforts. Specifically, in 2011, the WordCamp program. A few years ago, she realized that the WordPress community team would benefit greatly from publishing its source code in hopes that it would make it easier for people to make higher quality contributions to the programs. She wrote this talk and then developed the volunteer training program that the community team now uses, centering on the open sourcey reasons behind all the cookie things they do or recommend people to do. As a WordPress community junkie myself, I am especially looking forward to this talk. Give a warm applause to our last speaker this morning, Andrea Middleton.
This is a long walk. I don't know why I thought I had to walk over here to actually say hello. Hello. Howdy. I'm super, super honored to be here at WordCamp Europe. I'm disappointed in retrospect that this is the first WordCamp Europe I've ever attended, but I'm really happy to be here. My name, as mentioned, is Andrea Middleton. Slight factual correction. I started my WordPress blog in 2006, but I was hired to work on community in 2011 by Automatic, and focusing mostly on overseeing the WordCamp program for the past 6 years. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about the global community team. So what do we mean when we talk about global community, about the WordPress community itself? Well, look around you. This is it. You're in it. Done. I'm going to talk to you later. By participating in this event or by using WordPress in any way, you are part of our community. So that's it. You're on our team. Welcome. You belong here. The WordPress community team's job is to create community using the tool of these in-person live events. They are our code. They are our whatever designers use to make pretty things. What do they use? Pencils? I don't know. But you can't just organize any old event and create community, just like you can't throw a bunch of guitars and people into a room and record a hit album. So today I want to talk about how we craft our events to result in the WordPress community that we're all part of and proud of. Our community team organizes a very specific, very special kind of event. They're informal events, this event notwithstanding. They are organized by the community itself, and they're all about WordPress. They're put together by WordPress users just like you. Everyone in here is capable of being a community organizer on our team. By the way, that's also recruitment. Please join our team. We organize these events, building these communities using the same tools we use to build WordPress itself. If you're familiar with how the WordPress open source project works, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about will look really familiar to you. But I realize there are a lot of people who have been welcomed into the WordPress space who don't have a lot of experience in the open source space. So I want to do a little bit of background about open source. WordPress, this magnificent 28% of the internet, volunteer-coded, volunteer-organized project, was made possible because of the open source movement, and it has flourished through open source development. But what does open source really mean? Well, there's a book, little book, I recommend you read it, called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. I'm going to summarize the message of that book. It's written by a man named Eric Raymond, and he describes the rise and growth of the open source movement, focusing mostly on Linux, and then also a mail project that he oversaw and ran kind of as an experiment. And the book details a new approach to software development that Linux and other projects like it proved could work better than the old conventional style of software development. He defines the two main methods of software development as the cathedral and the bazaar. I just remembered I have a clicker. I don't need to be over there all the time. It's going to be great. All right, so the cathedral and the bazaar. In the cathedral approach, to build our software, we get a small group of developers, we stick them in a room, we don't let them talk to anybody, right? And they work on a predefined plan, and they build something, and they perfect it and perfect it and perfect it until it's as perfect as they can possibly make it, and then they release the product, and they keep the nuts and bolts to themselves, okay? Closed source is what it's frequently called these days. The bazaar method turns this all the way around. You publish the source code. You make it public for anybody to do anything with that they want. That's crazy. And you allow anyone who is interested and capable of and in contributing to the project to help you build it. The open source method in many ways seems very ridiculous. It shouldn't work for a number of different reasons. Largely divergent agendas and approaches to one project doesn't seem attractive, right? And conventional wisdom tells us that frequently adding a developer or multiple developers to a certain project tends to slow down development rather than speeding up, right? But it does work, and it's kind of sort of taking over the world. Why does it work? I love these visual notes by Julia Forsyth. They're magnificent. For one thing, it really calls out the problem with the cathedral approach. Primarily, the problem with the cathedral approach is that software, when it is written by people who aren't going to use it and kind of don't care, is never great software, right? The first and most important tenet of open source software is the importance of having users. You need to have and cultivate a large user base. And this is important because with many eyes, all bugs are shallow. Raymond calls this Linus's law, after Linus Torvald of Linux. And the idea here is that when lots of people are using the software and lots of people are, quite candidly, complaining about the software, certain people, one person over here can say, hey, this doesn't work. And someone on the other side of the world can be like, oh, yeah, I've got a fix for that. Also, when you have vastly different perspectives on what's good about the software, what's bad about the software, and also what it needs to do, you, in the end, build a better product because the direction of the product is responsive to the people who are using it. When someone finds an error or a bug in an open source project, we don't tell them to shut up and go away. On the contrary, we're like, ooh, great. Bring it in. You're a contributor now. Patch is welcome. We want you to be part of our team and help fix it. And because everything is public and open, anyone can learn how to provide really high-quality fixes to the problems that they found. If somebody loses interest, somebody else who's more motivated steps up and gets involved. So you have a constant stream of interested, motivated people. Motivation, though, is interesting. Why do people do this? Why would anyone contribute to an open source project? Well, according to Raymond and a lot of other people, every good piece of software starts because someone is scratching a personal itch. One thing about this gets them really motivated, and they want to change it. When they're passionate about the thing, they put a lot of attention to fixing the thing. And then they contribute it back to the overall software, and then somebody else comes in and says, ooh, but that's also broken, I'll fix that, and on and on and on. So we need people to use the software. We also need people to be annoyed with the software enough to want to fix it. But we don't want drive-by critiques, right? We want to keep people involved and connected. And that's why we always release early and release often. Rapid iteration is the key to keeping your contributors active and engaged. When they can suggest something and see it affect the overall project quickly and frequently, the imperfections don't matter because you know that it's going to get fixed soon because there's another release coming, right? And you know that what you have to say is important. You have a piece of this thing, and it keeps you in. And that rapid release cycle means that the project isn't ever perfect, but that's okay, because successful open source projects avoid perfection like the plague. If you're building this bazaar, perfection is like a wall around that participatory space, okay? You fix something, something else immediately comes up, and you cultivate that. The lack of perfection is not a problem. It's an opportunity. It pulls in future contributors. And as Andrew Nacin mentioned this morning, thank you, Nacin, for setting up my talk, it's better to have an imperfect project than to have a perfect product that nobody uses. And that's open source. It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's built on some central tenets of openness, transparency, collaboration, rapid iteration, and imperfection. Great, cool. But this is supposed to be a community talk, and you just gave us 13 slides about software development. Let's bring it back around, all right? Let's talk about how WordPress community organizers put these ideas of openness, transparency, iteration, imperfection into practice in our daily work. So the bedrock of the WordPress community is the local meetup group, the local user group, which we frequently call a meetup. It's a group of people who work with WordPress in any way, bloggers, developers, designers, trainers, whatever, to gather at least once a month to talk about WordPress and share their knowledge. It's locally organized, meets face-to-face. Anything that brings 2 or more people together is a meetup. There's no minimum number of attendees, and there's no required format. In fact, we have a lot of formats. Presentations, social gatherings, hackathons, co-working, help desk, contributor days, so on. The model is open. Anyone can start a meetup group. And if you want to be part of the WordPress open source projects program and take advantage of the benefits that come with that, you can join our chapter account on meetup.com, pictured here. Official groups, when they come into the program, agree to follow 5 good faith rules. Only wall of text in the entire presentation, I promise. But these rules, in their basis, are benefiting. Meetups are organized to benefit the community. Membership is open to anyone. That open bazaar, right? No one is paid to build community, just like with WordPress. Anyone can organize. Any trusted member of the group can organize. And we create a welcoming environment. So what does that have to do with open source? Well, as you can see, these are pretty much the same expectations that you find when you contribute code to an open source project. Openness, anyone can join, events are welcoming. Rapid iteration, anyone can organize an event and experiment with models and maybe focus on subject matters that scratch their personal itch, right? That brings in more people that have something to do with their ideas. Collaboration, decisions benefit the overall group, no one is paid. We use these methods to build our community and to solve the problems that come up in community organizing. For example, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Seattle, Washington. Anyone? I know we have a few Seattleites. Great city, huge tech community, beautiful. One big well, multiple problems in Seattle, but one primary Seattle problem that I'm sure Parisians know nothing about. There's a lot of traffic. It is really hard to move around in that city. It can take an hour to drive, I don't know, 15 miles. And this was a problem for our local meetup group because they were holding a monthly meetup, sure, downtown. They had a huge list of people who were members of the group, maybe 900, I mean, ridiculously big. But only 15, 20 people could show up every month. This problem will not be a surprise to other community organizers who are already part of our team. This is a constant problem that we have in big cities, right? And it's frustrating because you want everyone to join, but at the same time, if you move it out of downtown, how do you keep the downtown people? Stress, right? Because they're part of our program, or as part of our program, as an extension of our program, the group organizers opened the group and told everyone, hey, anyone can organize an event in our meetup. Doesn't have to be at a certain time, doesn't have to be at a certain place. The only requirement is you organize it and you show up to the thing that you organized. That's it. And in March, this is what their calendar looked like. As you can see, we've got what? 5 different meetings a month? Different times of day, different locations, different subject matter. All of those bring in more people. You have multiplied your inclusion by a factor of 5. Openness turned complaints into solutions. The people who wanted something and were asking for it were said, yes, you can have that, but you have to do it. And it brings people in. With many eyes and contributors, all bugs are shallow. Another way that local communities attract more participants and give people more of a chance to get involved is by organizing a WordCamp. WordCamps, you're soaking in it, just like all WordPress community events, are locally organized, volunteer-run events that focus on WordPress. A WordCamp is a little different from a local meetup in that, in really only a few ways. It's an all-day event. Usually it's organized on an annual basis, but not always. They are the celebration of the local WordPress community. Unlike this event, most WordCamps in our calendar are between 200 and 400 people. And what we call the minimum viable product of a WordCamp is very simple. 4, maybe 5 things. 50 people in a room all day long talking about WordPress. Number 5 that I highly recommend is coffee. So how do we apply our open source principles when we're organizing WordCamp? All right, let's talk about ticket prices, first of all. We had a little issue at WordCamp Europe in that, don't know if you heard about this, the people who are applying for visas to travel internationally to come here, some people got turned down because our ticket prices were too low. And a lot of people may ask themselves, why on earth would this event, this magnificent event, charge 40 euro a ticket? Is it because the WordPress project doesn't think it's valuable? No. That was a really obviously rhetorical question. Of course not. It's because this is a WordPress activity. WordPress is free. We want all of our events and everything that touches the project to be free and as close to free as possible and as accessible as possible. Nothing should get in the way of someone joining into our events if we can avoid it. And so we price our tickets as low as humanly possible. We do charge a little bit just because that way we're not throwing out about 400 lunches every day. But we price our tickets as low as possible to help create that participatory bazaar and make this an open, participatory event. Let's take another example. WordCamp London organizers this year. Was anyone here at WordCamp London? Woohoo! So that was an event where the organizers got super ambitious and wanted to try out some new things and really like experiment with the model. Not entirely the model, but really add more things to their program. This is great, and we encourage it. And sometimes when organizers get ambitious, they get busy. And sometimes when you get busy, well, maybe it's just me. When I get busy, I make mistakes sometimes. And what was happening with WordCamp London early days is that they would be publishing early and often, and sometimes they would have typos or mistakes in their content. The organizing team from the beginning, though, made a very conscious choice to organize in the open. All of their discussions that they could do in public Slack channels, in the local UK Slack installation, everything they could talk about publicly, they talked about publicly, and anyone could join those channels. So the entire community could interact with them very easily, or about as easily as it takes to participate on Slack. And so what they found was when they'd publish a blog post with a little error in it, someone would come into the Slack channel and be like, hey, got a typo. And it didn't just happen once, it happened a couple times. And so there's a couple ways that you can approach this as an event organizer, right? There is the cathedral approach, which is to say, this guy's a jerk, we need to get him out of here, and also we need to slow it down and perfect our work so we aren't criticized. They took the other approach. They took the bazaar approach, and they said, you've got a suggestion, you've got a job, welcome to our team. And they put him, and they created a quality assurance place on their group, and that guy's on the team, and he helped make their product better. Not by adding to their work, but by reducing their work and becoming part of their team. They opened it up. And I bet you money he is going to have a much more expanded role next year because he's had a good experience of being welcomed into the team this year. So where does this all get us? WordPress community organizing uses the same methods as the rest of the open source project, and building WordPress community is a contribution to the WordPress open source project itself, just like contributing code, just like answering questions in the support forums. Because we know that open source is built on collaboration and participation, let's talk very briefly about how community organizing helps the WordPress project get more of that stuff it needs. Participation is risky. It is hard to join a group. When you participate, you risk rejection and you risk failure. And I don't know about you, but I do not like that. People don't take risks when they don't feel confident. And people don't feel confident when they're uncomfortable. So one of the jobs of our organizers, the heart's blood of any great event organizer, is to tell people that they are equally welcome and important where they are. You're basically coding brains, right? You are setting up a live environment to tell people that they belong. Organizers in our program provide space that encourages connection within the event, but also encourages connection with the event. space to work on our events, space to work inside of our events, which is why the story of so many people in the WordPress community has a common phrase. I bet you've all heard it, and that is, and then I went to a WordCamp. Live events like WordCamps have been a turning point for thousands of people in the WordPress open source project. And I have another story for you. It's 2010, WordCamp, New York City. The lead organizer needed a volunteer to do some design work. Now, this particular lead organizer knew a lot of designers. Her name's Jen Milo. She's actually a very accomplished designer herself. But because she was right in that model of building that participatory bazaar, making everything open and encouraging people to take part, she made a public call for designers. And as you see, she doesn't just say, hey, we need a designer, folks. She says, we could use 3 designers, if that's what it'll take. She lists out, these are the little jobs, and more or less how much time it will take to do each one of them. And says, multiple people are welcome to do this work. And Mel Choice's partner saw this post and said, psst, Mel, you should do this. Mel had never been to a WordCamp before. She had never been to a meetup. She was just like, well, I like WordPress. I like design. I don't know, maybe I can help. And she made her first contribution to WordPress as a volunteer on a WordCamp event. Very small. It was the badges. She helped design and make those building images and then compose that cityscape. And that's it. She got involved. She gave a little piece. She attended the event. That's her in the middle with that big, 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 big smile. And she felt welcome. And not only did she feel welcome, she was a part of it. She had given some piece of it. And then for that reason, that it was partly hers. And that kept her inside of WordPress, with WordPress, for, well, you're going to hear for how long. She kept designing and kept iterating. And 2 years later, she was a speaker at WordCamp Philly. 2 years transition from designing tiny, tiny bit of the project, of the event, to becoming a speaker. And at that event, after she spoke, they had a dev day the next day, a contributor day in 2012. And at that contributor day, she made her first contribution to WordPress that made it into WordPress core. Someone there helped her work on the patch, and it was accepted. It was a small patch. It was very small. It was a small contribution. Again, doesn't have to be big. You don't have to rewrite something to be part of the team. But the very fact that she figured out, she got some help figuring that out, it went into core. It gave her confidence. It made her independent, so she was like, oh, okay, now I know how this works. I'm going to go. I can do it. And now I have people that I can bounce stuff off of because I've met people who want to help me. In the years that followed, Mel contributed to many efforts and many projects in the WordPress open source project. She contributed to MP6. She worked on Dashicons. She got a job at a WordPress company, Automatic, which is the same company I work for. And 3 short years later, she was named as a core committer for WordPress core in 2015, when 4.5 was released. That's a lot of movement in 5 years, from tiny little design contribution to core commit, permanent core commit. The next year, she led the design and development of 2017. And this year, she is the design co-lead for the WordPress core customization focus. It all changed at a WordCamp. 2 WordCamps, to be absolutely precise. A small volunteer opportunity brought her in. Another small contribution taught her confidence. But each of those events were key steps in her path to becoming a leader in the WordPress project. And without that program, who knows whether we would ever have been able to benefit from her perspective and hard work. So as you can see, in-person events are powerful tools for building that participatory bazaar. They create volunteer opportunities, and personal connections. And those personal connections, and eventually friendships, do a lot of things for us. They help us step out of our comfort zone and speak up instead of lurking or just standing back and thinking, I don't know, I have a thought, but I'm not going to say it. They help us contribute and collaborate more efficiently. I don't know about you all, but I don't generally see the best version of myself when I'm communicating in text on the internet. When we see each other and meet each other, we humanize the person on the other side of that screen, and we help ourselves get past our conflict, or at least be more patient with us. It helps us reach out and get support instead of giving up, and generally, it keeps us all in. Not only that, but the project itself depends on local community organizers to deeply understand their local communities, to draw attention to all the ways WordPress is being used, because that expands the community too. It helps the project grow. We depend on local organizers to say, hey, we're doing some cool stuff with WordPress over here, and we're going to tell you about it through our events. It helps us expand WordPress. So, you're already part of our conspicuously imperfect WordPress community, and open source methodology is all around you. Every local WordPress community has plenty of interesting bugs and problems that you can work on. And as you can see on this slide, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to help. We need your eyes. We need your unique perspectives. We need your participation. And now you know our source code, so you are educated community developers. Please join us.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I am such a lucky girl that I was allowed to MC here, because I wouldn't have wanted to miss this talk. It was so inspiring, and I really recognized so much things on your talk which fit to my own story. That was so cool. I will watch it again. But I'm quite sure it's not only me who found this very inspiring. We have still some time left for Q&A. And I would like to see if there are questions in this room. We have 2 standing microphones here in front and 2 standing microphones in the upper rows. So please, if you have a question, move to the microphones so that Andrea can give you the answers. I can then ask you the first question. Ah, you were there, great. Thank
Hi,
you.
my name is Dave
Hi,
from
Dave.
WordCamp Antwerp, Belgium.
Yeah.
What is your best practice for a multilingual audience like we have in Dutch and Dutch-speaking people and French, also a German part?
Well, this is pretty good right here. But this is an expensive solution, right? You know, we have been working on this off and on in multiple communities around the world, and I'm not sure we have established a best practice yet. We have a lot of different approaches, and I think they work well in different places. Some communities like to choose kind of a third-party language and have everything in that language, so that nobody gets mad that it's in one or the other. Frequently that is English, but not always. Some groups like to do kind of a parallel, like 2 tracks, 1 in each language. I was talking to a group organizer the other day and who asked the same question, and I suggested, well, I tell you what, open it up to the community. I'll encourage applications in both and see what you get, right? Because it may be that, you know, we're perceiving a problem where one doesn't exist, or it may be you get half and half, and then the decision's pretty easy, and you provide 2, right? But more than anything, I recommend asking the community what it wants, asking your group, and gathering high-quality data from the community. Our job isn't to give them what we think they want. Our job is to provide a space where we make the room and kind of get out of the way, and they do the connecting that they need to do and want to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Hello, Andrea. My name is Mauricio. I'm from the Madrid community.
Oh, wonderful.
And we have always the same problem, because WordPress is free and also the meetups are free, that people apply and we have a small venue, but they never show up.
Yep.
And it's a hard problem because we don't want and we can't put a price to our meetups, and we don't know how to solve it.
Yes. You are not alone. You are part of a large tribe of event organizers that is super annoyed by this. We were just talking about it in the community team channel. By the way, we have a couple of channels in Slack, in WordPress.org Slack. One is community-team, and that's where we talk about all these interesting questions. I get that it's annoying when 100 people sign up for something and 20 show up. From a person who likes consistency and predictable information, really gets on my nerves. However, sometimes the focus needs to be on the positive side, which is, hey, we got 20 people. And what I tell most community organizers who are facing this is track the data and see if you have any predictable ratio. WordCamp organizers can almost always guarantee that there will be about 15 to 20% attrition for every event. And when I organize WordCamps, I plan for that. I'm like, okay, so we have a capacity of, I don't know, how big is this room? 2,000 people? And so I'm going to sell 2,200 tickets, relying on the fact that 20%, that's not 20%, is it? Percents are hard. I'm going to plan for that attrition and go from there. So my first recommendation would be don't limit the number of places to the actual number of seats in there. However, there are also things you can do with community engagement to ensure that if people sign up, that they actually show up. Sending messages to people right before the event, following up with people in a super not angry way to say, hey, I saw you signed up and you didn't show up. It would really help us out if you could let us know that you're not showing up, and stuff like that, and just encourage best behavior. But it gets on all of our nerves, and unfortunately, the solution is worse than the problem. The work that we would do to make people be consistent keeps people out. So that's something that we tend to want to hold on to. I think we had over here first, and then we'll come back over here.
It's okay.
Sorry?
About that issue, we solved it in Greece by providing free pizza and beer for everybody.
Oh, food is a good way to get people to show up. I agree. And hey, look at that. Our participatory group is working, helping each other. Yes?
Hi, Amanda from Cluj, Romania.
Wonderful.
I often find that Meetup makes it a bit difficult to communicate with people. What other means do you suggest to bring people together or make it easier to communicate, like a Facebook group or?
There are a lot of things that work well. One of the challenges in our program is extrapolating the way we do things to work in every single culture in the world. That is one of the biggest challenges that the global community team runs into. So I don't have a definitive answer for you. I agree that sometimes meetup.com communication tools are suboptimal. But what I do recommend is finding the communication tool that works and doubling down on it. Some groups really find that a Facebook group is very, very powerful for them. Some groups find that a proprietary website is powerful for them. Some people find that, just Twitter all the time is the way. What I encourage people to do when they're thinking of solving this communication problem is make sure whatever decision they make sure that the solution is inclusive and open. Okay? The problem with proprietary websites is then like who has access to it, and then what happens if the person who owns it wants to, you know, go to Drupal or something, it doesn't care about WordPress anymore, how do you hand it off, all that stuff. So the solutions that close the group end up being more harm than the problem we're trying to solve. But honestly, I don't know where your community likes to interact as well as you do. Again, I hate to say it over and over, but I would talk to the group, say where will we most successfully communicate with each other, and follow their lead. Sorry, do I have time for one more?
Yeah, one last question.
Okay.
Go for it.
Hey, Andrea. This is Anastasios. Following up on the previous question, I'd like to ask you, to your knowledge, has it ever worked to make a poster about an event?
Oh, yes. Yeah. We get really focused on technological solutions to what are essentially human problems. Flyers, posters, signs, you know, I don't know, bumper stickers, whatever, you know, things that help people communicate, little flyers that people can leave at coffee shops, word of mouth, certainly. Organizing a Bring the Friend event is a great way to expand your communication and expand your group. Yeah, don't just fixate on digital solutions. There are a lot of analog solutions that are super powerful. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are done now, and it was a great talk again. I have to repeat that. So please give a big applause again to Andrea Middleton. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
Our sessions will continue this afternoon here in track 1 at 2 p.m. And there's going to be also a sponsor workshop with Bluehost and a speed networking at 2:30 in the Houseman building. Whoa, time flies. That was it for the morning sessions on our second day at WordCamp Europe. Many thanks again to our great speakers and fantastic audience. And thanks to the organizers for their amazing work and for their trust in me. It was a pleasure and an honor to be your MC. I hope I will see you all at the after party this evening. And now, as you are moving already, it's lunchtime. Lunch is served at the Houseman building, and you have all received tickets at the registration. Lunch tickets correspond to your dietary requirements. Please don't forget to have them with you when you're going to take your lunch. And lunch tables will be color-coded. So take care, see you soon, and bon appétit!